Barthawnesi. Rwy'n hiraethu am adrau, roedd eisiau yn o. Rwy'n hiraethu am adrau, rwy eisiau dyn o.
Oh, good. Neal's about to answer my question. Yeah, wonder what he thinks of this.
Magick Magazine with the $7.99. Monotheism comes from Egyptian Hermetics into Gnosticism and Neoplatonism to eventual Christianity. Wait a minute. How did you come from that line of thought? Why wouldn't you start with the PreSocratics? Because the Hermetic religion is sort of a first century, I think it's first century AD, first century CE, when the Hermetic religion starts to become a thing. I think Hermeticism. Oh, I guess 300 BC. Okay, 300 BC. That makes sense. Hellenism, but here's the thing, though. PreSocratics in 600 BC and 500 BC were already doing monotheistic monism, one God in charge of the universe. That idea already came. That ship was already sailed before the Hermeticists came. Hermeticists, in my opinion, are late in the game. Like Kabbalah, Hermeticism, people in the New Age. Let me tell you guys something. Online right now. You see this all the time. The New Age people, they love Hermeticism and Kabbalah. Those are the two things they love. Those are all modern shit. Those are all late. Those all came in like the 300s AD. Like all that stuff is late in the game. If you want to, I like the ancient late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, classical period shit. That's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the old pre-Socratic, the old Ionian thinkers, or the playwrights of Athens between like 600 and 400 BC. Euripides, Sophocles, Aeschylus, those guys. Homer, Hesiod, you know what I mean? Herodotus, all those guys. When you start talking about Hermeticism and Kabbalah, that's all common era shit to me. That's all new. You're already in the new world. You're already in the common era when you start talking about that stuff. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's all bad. There's nothing wrong with it. But you can't say monotheism comes from Egyptian Hermeticism. That's just an incoherent statement, in my opinion. Just saying. Now, I'd love to hear your argument for it. Maybe you have an argument that I haven't heard yet. I'm not ruling you out. You might have something that I've never heard yet. Maybe there's something that I've never thought about yet.
I'm sure you understand what the basic Hermetic belief systems are. That there is one divine deity who split into two, who split into three, then they split into seven. Right? So that's basically how it's formed. That's where Pythagoras got his idea of the monads from. Right? So we have our main monad and then the first 10. That's the way Pythagoras saw it. The Egyptians saw it more as a base 7, and I really don't have anything to do with the Kabbalah, which is based on the base 10. I stick to the strict Hermetic base 7, except there is an 8th, which is Aeon, right? And the 9th, which is everything, which brings us up with the Egyptian Ennead, which has 9, with its everything being Atum, right? And the first creator was Heka. Heka was the first creator, and Heka brought forth Thoth and Sheshet, right? Or some people say Mart. And then between the three of them, they created everything else. Oh my goodness, there's the Trinity. And these are doctrines, even though there are slightly different Egyptian creation myths depending on what city you go to, These are the doctrines from nearly 5,000 years ago. Right? We certainly do see that these travelled down into the PreSocratics. People like Plato, before he wrote his Timaeus. We have Epicurus telling us that he purchased 2 Egyptian books and then he wrote the Timaeus. So even Epicurus was telling us way back there that a lot of Greek thought, the Neoplatonic thought, was actually plagiarized from the Egyptian without giving it credit. So, Neal, listen to this. This is what Dr. Kristen Doisier has to say about the subject.
So we've now the Pyramid Text and the Old Kingdom, and we'll move on to the Middle Kingdom. I especially want to show you the Coffin Text spell or utterance 261. And it reads here at the beginning, you can see Chepa em Cheka. This spell is especially focused on becoming Heka, becoming magic. O noble ones who are before the Lord of totality, behold, I have come to you. Be afraid of me in accordance with what you have learned. I am the one whom the Soul Lord made before 2 things had developed in this world. When he sent his soul eye, when he was alone, when something came from his mouth, when his million of Ka was in protection of his associates, when he spoke with the one who developed with him, than whom he is mightier, when he took annunciation in his mouth. I, in fact, am that son of the one who bore all, being in protection of that which the Soul Lord commanded. I am the one who gave life to the Aeneid. I am acts as he likes, father of the gods, high of stand, who made the god functional in accordance with that which he who bore all commanded, a noble god who speaks and eats with his mouth. All was mine before you developed gods. Go down, you who came at the end. I am Heka. And I am Heka is here to the right, Inek Heka. And you can see here we have the book scroll, but we also have one of the occasions where we actually have a God's determinative at the end. So here it is, I am becoming Heka in terms of the God. And I am the one who gave life to the Aeneid. So this spell or utterance makes clear or shows us, illustrates the Egyptian belief here that Heka, the deity of magic, was at the very beginning and was a creator, was perceived as a creator deity.
Yeah. Because, by the way, Egyptian, when you say Egyptian Hermes, you realize there's a dichotomy there. Egyptian Hermes. Hermes is Greek, so it's Hellenistic. Egyptian Thoth. You said Thoth. Then you could be going back to the Iron Age or whatever, Bronze Age maybe. Thoth is older. Hermes is Greek. So Egyptian Hermetics is Hellenism and beyond. That's not monotheism existed before that. So, or at least the way I define monotheism. The way I define monotheism is the pre-Socratic monism of the arche, the nous, or the logos.
You remember in the hymn Tuta, the Memphite theology is the earliest known theology based on the principle of the logos. And those of you who've been with me for a while know about the logos, the creational speech, wording, phrasing, the creation by the word and speech. So Ta created the sun god through his word, or with his word, a concept that can also be found in the Old Testament and in the Gospel of John in the New Testament. At the beginning was the logos, and we see this concept and this idea much earlier in Egyptian cosmogony in context of Ptah. I find this really fascinating. And what we also see there is that with this logos, or that this logos and this creating by, with, or through utterances is Heka. So here again, we have this connection that Heka, or magic, is closely related to language.
Perion, the one, the good, that type of thing. There's one God who's in control of the cosmos, who separates heaven and earth, and all the other terrestrial gods are underneath him. Daemons, messengers, angels, whatever you want to call them. You know, all those other, yeah. That's what I define monotheism as. There is no such thing as pure monotheism. But people redefine monotheism into that stupid shit. Brain does not compute. Sorry. I don't care what some guy in the 1700s came along and redefined monotheism. I don't care. This is one of the problems I had with Dan McClellan. He wants to use the modern definition of monotheism, and I don't care about that definition. I'm using the term that we all understand and know. I'm being coherent with what I'm talking about. You're being annoying with what you're talking about. You're trying to sound smart, and it's just annoying. You're just trying to. Well, actually, as a scholar, I learned this a different definition. I don't care.
Oh, really, Neal? Guess what? I've got as many qualifications in this field as you do. I've just been doing it a little bit longer.
It has no purpose. It doesn't do anything for me. If we redefine monotheism as something that doesn't exist, then why are we using it anymore? Seriously, it's so stupid. It's so silly. It's so like intellectual garbage. People do that shit. They're just trying to sound smart. It's just people who, there's certain people, you know, I realize with PhDs in religious studies, they want to equate themselves with people who have PhDs in the actual like important shit, brain chemistry or rocket science or doctors or whatever, and they want to put themselves up in that status. I'm a doctor too. Monotheism is a definition of. Well, actually, monotheism doesn't exist. Shut up. Shut up. You are stupid. You are a Bible scholar. Sit the fuck down and get back in your place, Bible scholar. Thank you for the super chat.
That's a bit harsh. All right, Neal, let's have a look at this. Okay, I'm going to go away, check my research, and I'll get back to you. I know that you're a little bit drunk and that you're about to have a big hurricane descend on you, but I didn't think you were a nasty drunk. How about I offer you the opportunity to defend your position, and I'll present a little bit of my research here and you can tell me what you think. I'm happy to have my mind changed. I think a wise person unlearns something every day. It'd be good if you can show me something new. But you never teach anybody something new when you're being mean.
In my opinion. Just saying. Now, I'd love to hear your argument for it. Maybe you have an argument that I haven't heard yet. I'm not ruling you out. You might have something that I've never heard yet. Maybe there's something that I've never thought about yet.
In defense of the ancient origins of Hermetics. Hermetics is generally understood to be the syncretism between early Egyptian and later Greek belief systems, and its effect on philosophy and their practice of magic. Hermetics falls into broadly three categories. There is philosophical Hermetics, which deals with the 7 tenets of Hermetic philosophy. There is technical Hermetics, which deals with astronomy, mathematics, and alchemy. And practical Hermetics, which is the application of all of the previous into magic. It is not thought of as a religion by the practitioners. It is more of a practical science that will fit in with just about any belief system. Many people believe that the Hermetica, a collection of writings attributed to Thoth, the Egyptian god, is a scam, claiming it was only written in the late 1700s and revised in the 1800s by William Walter Atkinson into a book called the Kybalion. The Kybalion is undoubtedly the work of William Walter Atkinson and was popularised by the Theosophical Society. Still, the Kybalion is not the original Hermetica and has never made that claim. Do not confuse the two. The Hermetica, an ancient collection of 16 Hermetic texts, is still attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical ancient Egyptian sage whose wisdom is said to have transformed him into a god. The writings attributed to Thoth Hermes may originally have been the mystical utterances attributed to the god Heka, the god of magic and creation. Although not well known today, these writings have a significant impact on Western thought. They generally influence the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, most notably Pythagoras. Platon wrote that he found source documents claiming that Plato wrote the Timaeus after purchasing 2 of these ancient Egyptian texts. Like many other important Greek thinkers, Pythagoras was said to have studied in Egypt. By the time of Socrates in the 4th century BC, Pythagoras' reputed studies in Egypt were already taken as fact. The writer Antiphon claimed that his work On Men of Outstanding Merit, used as a source by Porphyry, that Pythagoras learned to speak Egyptian from Pharaoh Amasis II himself, that he studied with the Egyptian priests at Diospolis, Thebes, and that he was the only foreigner ever to be granted the privilege of taking part in their worship. The Middle Platonist biographer Plutarch, around 46 to 120 AD, writes in his treatise on Isis and Osiris that during his visit to Egypt, Pythagoras received instruction from the Egyptian priest Eunuphus of Heliopolis. Meanwhile, Solon received lectures from Soncus of Sais. According to the Christian theologian Clement of Alexandria, 150 to 215 AD, Pythagoras was the disciple of Soncus, an Egyptian arch-prophet, as well as Plato of Secnuphus. Some writers claim that Pythagoras learned geometry and the doctrine of metempsychosis from the Egyptians. Iamblichus describes Pythagoreanism as the synthesis of everything Pythagoras had learned from Orpheus, from the Egyptian priests, from the Eleusinian mysteries, and from other religious and philosophical traditions. In Plato's dialogue, he has Socrates repeat an Egyptian story that the deity Thoth, or Thuth in Plato, invented and introduced the alphabet. This shows that the Greek intellectuals in the 4th century BCE were already aware of this huge Egyptian/Hermetic influence on their scholars. Here are some quotes from the above. Phaedrus, 274b to 275e. Socrates says, I heard that Naucratis in Egypt was one of the ancient gods of that country, the one whose sacred bird is called the ibis, and the name of the god himself was Thuth. He invented numbers, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, games, using drafts and dice, and, most importantly, writing with letters. Plato's Timaeus and Critias state that in the temple of Neith at Sais, there were secret halls containing historical records which have been kept for 9,000 years. After Platon translated Plato, he went on to translate what became the Hermetica. Then, after being rediscovered in the 15th century Florence, it played a key role in inspiring the Renaissance, which ultimately led to the birth of our modern age. Many influential figures, including philosophers, scientists, and artists, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Dürer, Botticelli, Roger Bacon, Paracelsus, and Isaac Newton, have acknowledged their debt to the Hermetica. During the Age of Enlightenment, their popularity swelled in a society keen to move out of the Dark Ages and throw off the restrictions of the controlling church. Understandably, thinkers were excited to recover an ancient text, possibly older than the Bible, that held wisdom as its highest good. It encouraged the pursuit of science that included astronomy and mathematics as a form of personal development that resulted in one becoming a perfected being that could commune directly with the divine without the need of the intercession of the church. Understandably, the church and state were not pleased with the possibility of losing this control over its literati and the masses in general. Surprisingly, the first attack against the Hermetica came from the new Church of England, not from the established Catholic hierarchy. In 1614, King James I paid a scholar, Isaac Casaubon, to address the issue of the Hermetica. Casaubon published a textual analysis of the Hermetica, which examined grammar and vocabulary dating the Greek translations to the time of the Great Library of Alexandria in the 2nd or 3rd century CE. However, he failed to acknowledge the vast number of ancient texts translated into Greek at that time that were stored into the Library of Alexandria, of which the Hermetica was only one that would also fall into this category. Casaubon's son Merrick later wrote a book that portrayed John Dee as a confused occultist due to his belief in Hermetic principles. This criticism was widely accepted and dealt a significant blow to the reputation of the Egyptian sage Hermes. As a result, the books of Hermes were dismissed as fakes and forgeries. In the modern world, we have seen how well-timed hatchet jobs by the tabloid press can unjustly undermine someone's reputation. This is exactly what happened to the thrice great Hermes. When Casaubon was writing, very little was known about ancient Egypt. The hieroglyphs themselves were not translated until 2 centuries after his death. Yet, the discovery of the pyramid texts of Saqqara, which are almost 5,000 years old, contain doctrines that are almost identical to those expounded in the Hermetica. As a result, modern scholars revised Casaubon's judgments on the Hermetica and can now see that he was wrong to condemn them as a 2nd century invention. This suggests that the Hermetica may indeed contain the wisdom of some of the oldest religious texts in the world. The correlation of the Saqqara pyramid texts to about 2686 to 2181 BC means the wisdom in the Hermetica is about 4,500 years old. You have to remember that the pyramid at Saqqara is the oldest of the step pyramids. Given this, it is understandable why scholars in the 2nd century Alexandria would wish to rework these texts, which were 2,600 years old in their day, for their contemporary readership. To put this academic vandalism into proportion, consider that the teaching of Hermes had a significant impact beyond Europe, influencing not only the Mediterranean philosophers, but also Islamic mystics and the esoteric tradition of the Jews, the Manichaeans, and the Gnostics. Unfortunately, the importance of the Hermetica has been overshadowed by academic translations, Christian bias, and occultism. In contrast, well-known Eastern scriptures such as the Upanishads, the Dharmapala, and the Tao Te Ching are still widely available, studied, and read to this day. This is just a brief history and outline of the Hermetica. If you'd like to go to our Patreon site, I have a 3,000-word document that goes into the history of the Hermetica, who is Hermes, the origin of the Hermetica and Islamic civilization, the unifying system of Hermes, and the final decline of Hermetic thought and why it happened, as well as academic source list there for you. So if you'd like that, please just pop over to my Patreon page and you'll be able to download that document.
Magick Magazine. Extra super chat. Yes, the Egyptian stuff Pythagoras studied. How would you define that? Pythagoras is an OG. He's one of the greats. One of the greatest of all time. He was a monotheist, by the way. He believed in one God that was supreme. Pythagoras was one of the oldest monotheists on record. But are you gonna another word other than hermetikos? Another word other than hermetikos. You're talking about the Thoth The thrice greatest Thoth, is that what you're talking about? I think I get what you're saying. Thank you, Magick Magazine, for that super chat. Appreciate it.
So let's be really clear about this. When the translators in the Library of Alexandria translated the aphorisms from the Book of the House of Life, or the Demotic Book of Thoth, from about 2800 BCE, and the Pyramid texts about 3000 BCE, they were the first to translate Thoth as Hermes. This syncretism has unfortunately persisted to this day and has been popularized. So much so that if I used the term Thothetics or similar, no one would have any idea what I was talking about. The correct term that has been popularized in all of the literature is Hermetics, and we're stuck with it. I know, and I'm sure you know that. So unless we can come up with a new term, we're stuck with it. And finally, one last video for you by Dr. Justin Sledge. He does such a great summary of the Hermetica as it's compared to an ancient Egyptian pyramid text, which has now become known as Conversations in the Chamber of Light. It's brilliant, right? And he outlines all the comparisons between the two texts, all the similarities, and a few of the differences so well, there's no point in me reinventing the wheel. So I'll just play you this clip and you can see. Let me know what you think of this.
Is the text connection to the famed Hermetic literature. Here things are, you guessed it, complicated. The clearest parallel is the structure of both texts. The Demotic Book of Thoth and most Hermetic texts take the form of a kind of master-disciple dialogue. In both texts, Hermes/Thoth acts as a kind of revealer and interrogator for certain kinds of esoteric wisdom. In the Hermetica, that wisdom is fundamentally soteriological. It's about salvation, and often associated with a kind of mystical experience. In the Demotic Book of Thoth, what we have is a complicated initiatory sequence in which the scribal arts and the temple precincts are given, at least to us, in a profoundly esoteric interpretation. Of course, the Demotic Book of Thoth is also concerned with the connections between this world and the next life, and seems to see the House of Life, or the Chamber of Darkness as the text sometimes refers to it, as a kind of nexus between the two. Further, the dream interrogation sequence in the Demotic Book of Thoth seems distantly similar to the kinds of texts we see in the Corpus Hermeticum, especially the vision of the Poimandres in Corpus Hermeticum 1. The more aphoristic style of the Demotic Book of Thoth is perhaps, I think, also important. One theory for the development of the Corpus Hermeticum, and a theory I do find plausible in fact, is that the dialogue form of those texts as we have them are actually built up around a core of short aphorisms. Thus, the earliest Hermetic texts were probably simply aphorisms of Hermes Trismegistus, and as these were explicated, the dialogues as we know them emerged. The Demotic Book of Thoth is much more on the aphoristic end of that spectrum, and even includes some short wisdom literature sections, very much like other Egyptian literature, but also literature we find throughout the ancient Near East. You can think of something like the Book of Proverbs or Ecclesiastes. So while the content of the two texts is different, the structure of the text does seem somewhat strongly homologous. Further, Thoth himself is referred to in the Demotic text at line 426 as the quote, where, or great, 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 a clear Egyptian version of the thrice great Hermes. In both of these texts, the Hermeticum and the Thoth text refer to the House of Life. The two texts also share some of the same personnel. For instance, Imhotep, or Asclepius, appears in both texts. There are also literary and ritual parallels as well. For instance, there's a wordplay on the Egyptian word for papyrus roll, with the word for generation, which is only possible in Egyptian or Coptic and occurs in both the Demotic Book of Thoth and on the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, very advanced Hermetic texts preserved in Coptic in the Nag Hammadi Library. Further, both the Latin Aesculapius and the Demotic Book of Thoth both seem to share an aversion specifically to the smell of myrrh as a kind of incense. This would have been a very popular incense in the ancient world, and curiously enough, both of them seem to condemn it for some reason. No doubt, there are several points of contact between the Demotic Book of Thoth and the Corpus Hermeticum, though one has to admit the texts are very different. The basic metaphysics of the Corpus Hermeticum is to be found in Middle Platonism and the Middle Stoa, with the Demotic Book of Thoth showing none of that influence. And while the Corpus Hermeticum does show some basic knowledge of Egyptian temple life, it utterly pales in comparison to the incredibly robust descriptions of the House of Life in the Demotic text. Simply put, we're at square one when it comes to an understanding of the relationship between the Demotic Book of Thoth and the larger Hermetic literature. Clearly, there are connections and contrasting elements, but just what the relationship is remains a fascinating line of research. Regardless of the connection to the Corpus Hermeticum, however, the Demotic Book of Thoth is an positively exciting glimpse into the world of the esoteric initiatory practices of the ancient Egyptian priesthood. The literature of ancient Egypt has long been neglected, and I'm really glad to play a small part in making it more accessible.
Now, it must be remembered that the Greek Hermetica was translated from ancient texts like the Book of Thoth, like the Egyptian pyramid texts, right? And these aphorisms were then put into the Hermeticas around the 1st or 2nd century BCE, right? But these Egyptian aphorisms were given a Greek flavor by the Greek translators, and we know that they've done that a lot. But what we're looking at here is we're not getting caught up on the word monotheism. What we're getting caught up on is that the concept of one great big overall deity has been there since early Egyptian times. And I know that you know this. I just don't know why you chose to have such an issue with me about it. I admire your work. I don't have any issues with you. I think you do a great job. And I've been a financial supporter of yours from way back, very close to when you very first started. I believe that you do a really good job of getting this information out into the public. You know, all credit to you. I'm on your side. And hey, hopefully I've shared something with you today that you found interesting. And I'm looking forward to you coming back to me and sharing something with me that I'll find interesting too. Until then, every blessing to you. So Neal, here are a few primary sources for you. I'm going to quote a few secondary sources, but I know that you don't like academics, right? And how academics treat primary sources. So I thought I'd go for the primary sources first, right? And then just throw in a few secondary sources, because as much as you hate this phrase, the current consensus is that ancient Egyptian belief systems are Hermetic belief systems. When examining the sources, make sure you pause if you need to. Also, if you'd like a copy of this article, the whole transcript plus extra information, remember you can go to our Patreon site, download this document, including all of this source information as well.